Welcome to Know the Love of Christ.
Hello and welcome back to Know the Love of Christ. This is Brittany along here with Dee and Stephanie.
Hi.
Hey.
Oh yeah, say hey. So, a quick recap before we get into our lesson today. If you were with us on the last episode, you know that we covered Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41, and chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. And in these two chapters, beginning with 35 through 41, we looked at how Jesus calmed a storm, and while he was in the boat, how his disciples were concerned about the storm, and Jesus asked them why are they afraid? And he eventually calms the storm, and they're like, who is this? Like, who is this man that even the winds and the sea obey him? And so that's another look at his authority, which is, if you've been with us, you've noticed that that's been a recurring thing throughout Mark so far, Jesus's authority. And then if you jump ahead, not jump ahead, but to the next chapter that we covered, which was chapter 5, verses 1 through 20, then we notice about Jesus healing a demon-possessed man who's got all these demons in him that are called Legion, and they ask Jesus to not hurt them, but instead send them into the herd of pigs, and he does, and the pigs end up drowning, and once again, the people are marveled at Jesus's miracle, and once again, this is Jesus establishing his authority yet again. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing chapter 5, 21 through 43. So, if you would like to go ahead and pause the podcast now and take the time to read that and then come back in and join us, we'll get started.
So let's start with that first chunk, which really it's kind of hard, I feel like, to break down this account right here because it's so interwoven. We're going to start with, which there were no J's in Greek, so it's actually pronounced really different. So no matter what I do, we're going to butcher it. But I'm going to start saying Jairus. That's how I'm going to call him. I don't know how y'all pronounce his name. Jairus. I don't know.
Oh,
in the Greek, it's Jairus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. However you want to pronounce it is good. But
we have J in the English language.
We do.
Let's just stick with the
Yeah,
J.
that's what I'm saying. We're going to stick with the J, but I don't know how. Yeah. Some people call him Jairus, and some people call him Jarius. So, yeah. Real fun fact right there. But anyways, we're going to start with the ruler of the synagogue coming to Jesus. And then we are going to see a woman come in the crowd in the midst of this and have Jesus interact with her. And then we'll go back to Jairus. Let's stick with that first little patch right there where Jairus first approaches him. Do you have anything, Dee?
It says that he's a ruler of the synagogue. And I thought, Pharisees are always following him. Now, Jairus, pleads with him for help to heal his daughter. I'm just wondering what the Pharisees are thinking at this point, because he's one of them, sort of, and they're probably going, wait, hang on, wait a minute. You're supposed to be on this side of the camp, but you're going to go pleading to him. So that was one thing that caught my attention.
Yeah, and
I thought it was interesting too. Like, he's a ruler of the synagogue, and he comes falling at Jesus's feet, and like, obviously we have the Bible, so we know that Jesus is the Son of God. But other people who are following Jesus, you got people that are really kind of straddling the fence. Like, you got some people who wholeheartedly believe like he is the Messiah, he is the promised seed of David. He is the promised one that was supposed to be coming to us and has come to us. Then you have other individuals who are like, no, this man is just nuts. He's casting out demons because, he's part of the devil's family. It's pretty serious. So,
and it was pretty immediate too. I'm sorry, Brittany, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say in verse 23, it says, and implored him earnestly, like, begging him continually, like, please, so.
Yeah, because verse 21 says, a great multitude gathered together to him, and he was by the sea. So he's just getting off the boat, and here comes Jairus coming at him right from the get-go.
right. And typically you only bowed to someone during those times who had a higher rank than you, a greater authority. It was a significant thing for him to do, and those around would have seen that. And it's it's a huge contrast to what we've seen so far, but it's also kind of a good lesson for us. I mean, I think of Nicodemus over, I mean, you could look in John 3 or John 7 or 19 and see how he interacted with Jesus and the things he did with Jesus, and he seemed very sincere. But typically we're not seeing sincere people as far as rulers of the Jews go. But it's a good reminder for us not to lump everyone in that same category when we come upon people that are denominational or people in the LGBTQ community. You know, we sometimes write people off because of the group that they're with. You know, there are truth seekers among us that we would never look at and be like, oh, they're just like me, but they are.
Yeah.
You know, whether or not they're in a right relationship with God, you know, is outside of that context. We're looking for people who are looking for the truth. And the fact that this is a sincere engagement with Jesus, to me, is just such a stark contrast. But I did think also about verse 21. One of the things that stuck out to me immediately, like we've said, he's surrounded by the crowd. It's just, it's a theme throughout his life. And I got to thinking about it in my own context of my life. When I have my two kids around me, which very rarely have they been sick at the same time. That's maybe happened twice out of the 5 years I've had two. But I mean, it's overwhelming for me when they're both in a needy point, and I'm like, listen, like, I need you to step aside so I can deal with your brother or your sister, whichever one it is. And I get like anxious, and, you know, it's frustrating. And it's, I don't want to say burden, but I mean, it's somewhat of a burden. And like, that was Jesus's whole life. And he never came in contact with a single person that he did not care deeply and wholly for. And to be in that constant state of being surrounded by, I mean, we don't know how many people, but this was a great multitude. This was a crowd.
Be overwhelming.
Yes, it's so overwhelming. And it, you know,
And it was never just to say, I love you. It was always, I need, I want, I need, I
and
want,
I mean,
help me.
Like
when my
children.
Kids, when my kids are on me and they're loving on me, that can be overwhelming. It's a positive. It's a good situation. But I mean, just the emotional burden of that, it just makes me appreciate his sacrifice that much more, coming down from heaven.
But, you know, it's interesting that you say all that, Stephanie, because, you know, we talk about all the time about how Jesus is fully God, but he's still fully man. And the fact that, you know, the Bible doesn't specifically say that he felt these emotions, but he was human, so it was very possible for him to feel those emotions. But somehow, through the grace of God and through him, he was able to keep it all together. Like, I'm not going to let these people overwhelm me, or even if he did feel overwhelmed at time, you know, he's got it under control, you know. And I think that's also something to think about too. That's a great example for us, because when I'm overwhelmed, it shows. Like, there's no hiding it, you know. If I'm stressed, if I'm tired, if I'm anxious about something, like, there's no way to hide that, at least in my mind. Or, you know, and I always tell people, I can control my tongue, but I can't control my face all the time, you know? And so
right there,
I don't know what Jesus's face looked like, but I'm willing to bet, you know, it probably didn't read across like it would on some of our faces too. But I was also thinking too about how you guys said about how he came from the other side, you know, so he's just getting off the boat, and he's engulfed by this great crowd of people. It also says something about their communication too. I mean, obviously they weren't Neanderthals. They weren't cave people. They weren't cave people, but obviously they didn't have, you know, like tablets or cell phones. I mean, yeah. Somebody great is coming. Tell the people, you know, and people were there within an instant. I just, you know, I think that's interesting.
You know what else I noticed too was in verse 24. It says, you know, so Jesus went with him. Like, he didn't question, and all these people are asking him, help me, heal me, do this, do that. I want. And he doesn't follow all of them, but I guess the way Jairus approached him, humbled himself, Jesus knows our hearts. So he saw, I'm sure, Jairus' heart in this, that he was truly, you know, worshiping him, I guess you could say, knowing who he is. So he just went. He didn't question.
Right. But I mean, it's also Jesus, and he knows the future. And we know that the purpose of miracles is to confirm the message,
Yeah.
And so I think, these miracles that he performed, there's a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's always, we don't know about all the healings and stuff. But I think about, the fact that he knew ahead of time, he knew how humble he would be, but he knew that she would die before her dad even asked. He knew she would be dead. And so, of course, he's going to go. Like, we have this account, but I mean, the fact that it amazes me.
It does. Because, I mean, people around them didn't know.
Yeah.
They didn't know Jairus' heart. They didn't know, they just didn't know. They're observing this. I don't know, it caught my attention.
I wonder if it would surprise people since he was a ruler of the synagogue.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I mean, because Jesus didn't flock to the wealthy or the, he's already said, I came
to the poor and needy.
the sick are in need of a physician. Like, he's not going to the wealthy and the mighty. And so this would have been a little different for him to follow a ruler of a synagogue, to go somewhere. I don't know that it would be surprising for them. They may have been like, oh, okay, there it is. We don't know what people are what biases they're looking to confirm or anything. But yeah. But it is interesting because, like you said, I mean, they are pressed against him, because if we move on to the portion where it talks about the woman who had the issue of blood, that they are so pressed in on him that when he asks who touched me, like his people that were with him are like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone is touching you. Why would you ask that? But, we know because it tells us, like you said, we have this account to read. We know what happened. They didn't see the power go out from him.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea that he's healed someone. And he's all of a sudden like, who touched me?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that does make sense for them to ask. But I just love this account. This is one of my favorite.
Of the woman?
Yes.
Yeah.
Accounts of Jesus healing someone and the interaction there. I just love this account. I don't know why. It's always been that way. But I was thinking about how different it was for these two people, because we're told at the end of this chapter in verse 42 that the little girl was 12 years old, and this woman had that problem for 12 years.
12 years, yeah.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought about that, and
me
how different their lives would have been.
Mm-hmm.
The 12 years for them would have been, I mean, obviously children bring a lot of changes. That's 12 years of joy contrasted with 12 years of sorrow and pain and embarrassment and isolation. And her whole life was wrapped up in this. Women who could not bear children, if this happened after she was of marriageable age and she was married, her husband could have divorced her, probably would have divorced her. If not, she has this from the time, if this hit at puberty, because that's normally when they were married off. Once they had a period, they would then be considered of marriageable age because they are fertile. And so this would have been a time of joy for her. Typically, young women, often young girls, would look forward to their marriage, which to us seems so weird. At 12 years old, seems wrong. But culturally speaking, it was different back then. But from what I could find, culturally speaking, like that would have been a joyous time for her. That's a coming of age, like a rite of passage. And this would have completely, if this had hit at puberty, completely ruined her life, like changed all the prospects for her. And it would just engulf every aspect of her life. She would have not been most women who were, she would have been marginalized. She wouldn't have been able to make an income.
Yeah.
She would have been like basically poor, either divorced or single, unprotected. And so the fact that she's in this crowd, she could have gotten in a lot of trouble for that. He commends her for her faith there. That is huge, but on this day, as we get in further and we see the healing, they both, there are situations completely reverse. Jairus has a daughter that has become sick. She dies, and she gets complete healing. She's brought to life. This woman has this issue of blood. She touches his garment, complete healing. But with that contrast, it made me think, sorry, I feel like I'm monologuing here. With that contrast, the thing that really struck me is how much we mitigate circumstance or mitigate our emotions on circumstances or do it for other people. Like, oh, my life's not as bad as theirs, so I shouldn't be as like sorrowful. This shouldn't be so hard for me. I could have it so much worse. Or we do it to a friend like, oh, so you're sick. It could be cancer.
You made some very valid points, and, suffering is a universal thing. But, like you were saying with these two individuals, the little girl is suffering because she's dying, but then you have the father that is suffering too because he's watching it and he realizes there's nothing that he can do. And this woman with the 12-year issue of blood, if you go back to Leviticus 15:25 on down, like 25 through 30, like she can't come in contact with anybody. Anybody that comes in contact with her is unclean. Anything she touches, anything she sits on, her bed, anything that she is unclean, including the individuals. And so, we don't know for sure if she had family or not, but let's just assume that she did. That's family that can't even be in her presence, can't even enjoy her company, and vice versa. She can't enjoy theirs. But I think it's interesting to see that both of them, within these 12 years, the daughter, well, rather the father and the girl, they both realize that whatever this situation is, I can't fix. But they heard of this man, they heard of Jesus, and they know that he can fix it. And that's why you see Jairus coming. He's begging and pleading, please come fix this situation. We don't know how long his daughter has been sick, but she's 12 years old, and then this woman has been, with this blood issue for 12 years, and they both knew. One was begging and pleading, please come heal. Jesus goes. And then the faith of the woman, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, I will be okay. Like that's a great amount of faith that we see within these two individuals, and realizing that, look, I can do a lot of things, but it says for the reader for sure. I don't know what they were thinking, but it says for the reader for sure, you can't do anything without God. Like you can't even wake up. You can't count the hairs on your head. Like you can't do anything without him. And so I think that's a great thing to remember when we look at both of these individuals.
This is almost a rebuke also, if you think about it, because at least it's a rebuke for me, I should say, because I'm learning from them, Jairus and this woman, they waited until they were absolutely desperate before coming to Christ. Jairus, we don't know how long she was sick, but sick enough to the point of death. And then this woman spent all her money. It's been years. She's gone to physicians, and it just grew worse. And her comment in verse 28 is, if only. So it's like, it's her last desperate moment, and it's Jairus' last desperate moment. If only, So it's like, ooh, what if they had come sooner? Or what if I come sooner? We saw where he healed the fever, Peter's mother-in-law's fever, and then ends up healing the demon-possessed person. So it's like nothing was too big or too small for Jesus. So do I wait to the point of being absolutely desperate, or do I come to him earlier?
True, which we don't. It could be that this is their first opportunity with
Well,
Jesus
yeah.
too, but they have exhausted all resources at this point.
And Jesus may not have been on the scene at the beginning, but seeing this, it's written for our learning. It's like, ooh, now I can apply that to, don't wait till you're absolutely desperate. Stop doing things yourself and just give it to God.
Yeah, Rick always says if it's small enough to worry about, it's big enough to pray about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then if you look at verse 32, so immediately after the woman is healed, Jesus asks who touched me, and of course, we've already made the statement, like the disciples are looking like, Jesus, you for real, man? Like all these people up against you worried about who touched you? And and verse 33 says, but the woman, knowing what happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And so it's just like, she had enough faith to know, if I just touch him, I'll be okay. But it was like, she didn't think about and there was no consequence. But the fact that she came to him in fear and trembling, like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be in trouble. Like, and I think that says something about us too. Like when we go to prayer and go to God in prayer and we pray to him, you know, like you guys are saying, if it's small enough to worry about, it's big enough to pray about. You know, how many times do we go to God in prayer and we think, okay, I'm going to pray for this, this, and this, but I'm not going to pray for this because that's a small thing. Like God doesn't have time to worry about that. You know what I mean? But God says, no, you come to me with every prayer. Ask and it shall be given to you. Like never think that God is above, no pun intended, that God is above your prayers. Like he wants to answer every single prayer. Now, every time he answers, it may not be the result that you want, but he never says, hey, come to me with this, this, and this. Only come to me with what you need and what you think you might need, but leave this and out. Like, no. If there's something that you truly want, pray about it, and God will give it to you. And you should pray as if, and I can't think of the verse now, but, you know, it says, pray as if you already know you've received it. I can't think of the verse. I want to say it's over in James. Well, I paraphrased. That's not exactly what it says. I paraphrased.
Pray in faith.
Huh?
Pray in faith.
Yeah. You know, pray in faith. Pray that you know that God will answer your prayer. He will deliver it for you. That's a comforting and reassuring thing for us as Christians.
Yeah, and that word there, where he says your faith has made you well, that word is actually like your faith has saved you.
You know what else? Is that she wanted to touch the hem of his robe. Now, I think hem is being at the bottom, but it could have been the hem around, you know, the sleeve or whatever, the border or whatever. So she wanted just a little bit of him to get so much. Like she knew just that little bit of him was enough for more than what she needed.
And it would, that would have been the furthest away from him that she could get while touching him. It's not actually him because, like Brittany mentioned, the Levitical laws, you weren't allowed to touch someone that was bleeding. They were out of the camp.
Yeah.
They were outside the camp.
Yeah.
And so, like, she's living outside the camp all of 12 years. But for him to touch her would make him unclean for a whole day. Now, later when he touches the corpse, that's like a whole week. But she knows, and from what I could find, some men would go so far, and I'm sure the Pharisees were this way, that they would not touch a woman lest they become accidentally contaminated. Like if it was not their wife, they were not touching her. Not on the arm. Like, you could touch the hair, I guess, on their head, and it would still be, you're unclean. And so for her, I wonder if part of the fear and trembling was, I've made him unclean. You know, he's asking, and I have to admit that I've touched him, and now he's unclean. I've tainted or sullied his
Which is so interesting when you think about it, though.
It's not true.
You know,
because
it's kind of mind-blowing. It's like she knew if she touched him, she could be healed. And obviously, we're just speaking hypothetically. But what if she did feel that way? Like, oh, no, I've somehow made him unclean.
Right. You know, you go into this, and anybody else would have been unclean. But Jesus, when he came in contact with anyone, he left everything clean. And as Christians, we should be the same way. Anything we come into contact that's unclean, we should leave it sanctified. Not obviously not in a miraculous way, just in a figurative way.
And you know what else? When he said, "Who touched me?" Like he knew.
Yes, he did.
He knew. But to ask reminded me of when they were tearing apart the roof, and he just waited for them to lower this paralytic, and yet here he is. Who touched me? And he just waited for her.
Yeah. It makes me think of like God in the garden. Like, where are you?
Yeah.
Like he didn't know.
Right.
Or me with my kids. Like, who ate this cookie? Or who broke this whatever? I know. I want you to tell me. But he's making a point here.
I would like to clarify that it wasn't in James. It was Mark 11:24. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. That's the verse I was looking for. I thought James, but it was Mark 11.
Mark 11. We'll get to that.
Yes,
We will.
All right. So as we move on, we have a very, very short amount of time before we're going to wrap it up. But just to finish this out, we see Jesus continue on after this, and because someone from Jairus' house comes and says, "You don't need to bother the teacher anymore. Your daughter's dead." And I love Jesus' response here. Do not fear, only believe. Which, I mean, if I were to paraphrase that, it would come along like, trust me. Trust me. Come on, trust me.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like Jesus does that with so much. We look at circumstances and we go, I'm throwing the towel in. It's done. Which, I mean, Jairus didn't say this. So we don't know if it was a servant, but someone from his house came and said that. And, you know, he goes anyway. He tells her to arise, and she does. And one of the cool cultural things I found was that they paid mourners, like, to facilitate the grieving process. I didn't know that.
You stole my fun fact.
Okay, tell me the fun fact. You say it. You say it.
Actually, I stole it from Hiram. He was the one that told me about these hired mourners, and I'm like, huh?
But yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, they hired mourners and criers. I mean, she's just died, and they're already at the house by the time that they show up. And it's not like it was the 2 days journey or anything. Like, it would have been relatively close, you would think. But I mean, like I said, he gets there. He only takes his inner circle, which is this the first mention of his inner circle? Not that they call it that, but he only allows Peter, James, and John to come with him to the house, and he puts everybody out because they mock him. They say, because he said, why are you wailing like that? She's just sleeping, and they mock him for that. And he goes inside, resurrects her, like this huge, powerful act, and it's not a footnote but I mean, it's like at the end of the chapter, the way they've broken it up, which we know that's not how it was originally written necessarily, stuff, and it's just kind of like a little footnote there at the end, like, oh, and he raised her and told him to give her some food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever I read this, and I know this is kind of, you'll get the point once I'm putting together, but I'm going off in fantasy land here. Okay, I don't know if anybody has seen Alice in Wonderland, but the Queen of Hearts, and she's got the big head and all, but she's got all these people around her who are like, yes, queen, like they're a bunch of yes men, like, whatever the queen says, they're like, yes, queen, you look beautiful, this, that, and the third. And that's what I think about these mourners, like, and it just kind of reminds me of, like, be careful of the company you keep. Like, everybody's not for you like you think they are. Like, God can do tremendous things for you.
I think
sometimes
right there,
when other people
go ahead,
see that, it rubs them the wrong way.
I think right there how Jesus is responding to them, like, he's calling them out on it, like, which makes me feel good, because I hate when I see fake displays of any kind of emotion, like inauthenticity. He's like, why are you making this commotion? And so, I mean, I don't know exactly why he said that, but it's almost not that he mocked them, but he's like, why are you doing this? And they responded in what they thought was responding in kind.
All right, so many things have popped in my head with y'all talking about this. Okay. All right, wait. So let me get my thoughts straight. All right. So he permitted Peter, James, and John, right? The inner circle. What I thought about that was James and John, he nicknamed Sons of Thunder, What I thought, he included them almost as if to say, all right, y'all can chill out. Look what's about to happen here. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but what I'm saying is, like, in order to humble them, I guess you could say, because we didn't know if their personalities were thunderous, as we said before. But after that, I never, ever once thought of all the people having the commotion as y'all saying. I never knew about the professional mourners.
Oh, I didn't either before I researched it.
But I always took this as family was there and friends of them, like real friends, and I never knew about the mourners, like I said. So to me, they are just wailing and just so upset that this young child died. And for Jesus to come in and say, why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead but sleeping. He was almost as if saying, I got this type of
Yeah.
thing. You know, death is permanent, but she's sleeping. This is just temporary. Watch.
Right.
This is why. You know, and when they laughed him to scorn, I could see me saying, "You are crazy," because this is his first recorded resurrection. There was never a resurrection during his time, so I would have laughed him
Oh yeah.
to his face too, thinking, "You are crazy. Get out of my house. My child just died, and you're gonna come in here and say she's sleeping?
Yeah.
I saw
We
her
don't know,
die."
like the mom could have been
Yeah.
outside with the mourners.
Yeah, and for him to take both the father, the mother, and those who were with him, as verse 40 says, you know, which would have been Peter, James, and John, you know, who better to bring them in? You know, it was for their faith. Jairus came to him in faith. Here you go. You're going to see. Peter, James, and John, you're going to see. You're my closest friends. So I think it was for their faith that he brought them in, because he could have just said it and she could have been raised from the
And
dead.
he didn't even have to say it. He
Right, he could have just
done it.
Yeah. So, you know, that was for their benefit. And look, and he says in 41, little girl, I say to you, which was translated to Talitha Kumi, little girl, I say to you, arise. His word is so powerful. His word raises this child from the dead. You know, spiritually speaking, he raises us from the dead too. And, you know, the girl arose, so, you know, he's got this authority over death now. They all see this girl experienced this. And so it's, all of this popped in my head when y'all were talking. So I was like, wait, I gotta say this before I forget it. But it just, this whole, you know, you like the woman's part of the story. I like this part of the story because it's just so emotionally charged.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
And he's the piece in that whole charged, you know, scene there.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. So we're going to wrap it up here, even though I'm sure we could keep going.
We could.
For time's sake, there's a lot here. But let's ask the question we always ask. Where do we see the love of Christ in this passage? Brittany?
I see it in both Jairus' daughter and the woman. I think it's interesting that we noticed already that these people came from two different parts of the world. They were on two different sides, you know. One is the child of a ruler. The other, we don't really know her background, but she suffered for 12 years by herself. Neither one of them are above being saved. God has the power and the authority to heal the both of them. And he does without any hesitation. I see the love of Christ in that situation or in those two individuals because it just reminds me that I once, not sick like that, but I once was lost, you know? And even if I thought my life was worse than someone else's or whatever the situation is, the fact of the matter is I am able to be saved just as much as the drunkard is. You know, the drunkard is not any worse off than I was if I was still engaged in sin. And I think that's a great thing to remember because I think it was you, Stephanie, who said earlier we tend to mitigate whatever we mitigate. Anyways, we tend to judge other people's situations, and you know, you look at this story of these two individuals, and there's no judgment here.
I see it just all over. I can't pick one place. I guess in verse 40, maybe, when, you know, 39 and 40, when he's just telling them without saying it, I'm here. I'm peace. I'm life. I'm the resurrection. But instead, you know, softly rebukes. Why are you making this commotion and weeping? You know, because he does that for me too. So that's where I think I see it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be really weird and pick a super specific point because you guys have already said a lot. But in verse 43, it says they told them to give her something to eat, which she's just been resurrected, and he's telling them to nourish her. And in our spiritual walk, you know, we die, Jesus resurrects us, and then he said, be nourished, you know, partake of everlasting life, eventually,
bread
but
of
also the
life.
bread of life.
Ooh.
I'm thinking spiritually nourished, be in the Word. And we have this Word, and it's so nourishing. And the parents would kind of be like our spiritual mentors, our Christian brothers and sisters. You give her something to eat. You help her be nourished. You make sure, and we try to, when we disciple people, we try to do that. We try to, study with us, be with us, let us help you. And he gives that to us. And that's where I see it. But I also see it throughout the whole chapter, as always. But yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much again, if you're listening, for joining us today. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us. And we would love to connect you with someone local or study with you ourselves. But as always, we hope that you will seek to know the love of Christ in your own life. Until next time, bye.
Bye.
You can reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram. We would love to hear from you. And be sure to click like and share this episode with family and friends. In doing so, you're sharing the love of Christ.